Today is our third session on the future of the past, Reconstructing Article 109.3 of the UN Charter towards the San Francisco Promise to constitutionalize the United Nations and international law. We're joined today by the book's author, Dr. Shahryar Shirai. Welcome, Dr. Shirai. I'll properly introduce Dr. Shirai shortly, but first, some housekeeping. Firstly, to ensure everyone gets a chance to join in, I'll ask everyone to keep their questions or comments to 2 minutes. If you exceed that time, I'll interject to ask you to wrap up so everyone has an opportunity to speak. Once everyone that would like to ask a question or make a comment has had the opportunity to do so, I'll open the floor for further discussion with a second round of questions and comments. Does anyone object to the community agreement for the Q&A? Okay, thank you. You can raise your hands virtually or physically, or put your questions in the chat. I'll come to you on a first-come, first-served basis. We'll stop at about 10 minutes before the end of the session at around 1:20 Eastern Time for any announcements you may wish to make unrelated to book club. Please, therefore, hold on to any comments you may have that are not related to book club until the end, or you can put them in the chat at any time. With housekeeping out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce the author of The Future in the Past, Reconstructing Article 109.3 of the UN Charter towards the San Francisco Promise to constitutionalize the United Nations and international law. Dr. Shahryar Shirai.
Thank you very much. Great to see you all again, familiar faces, world strivers for world peace. Good morning to most of you. Some of you are in Europe and other places, but most of you are in the States, and I am in San Francisco Bay Area, not too far away from where the conference was held about 80 years ago. In the last chapter, we ended with the dramatic final vote on the Security Council, which I called the Connolly Act of tearing the charter. With that defeat, the anti-veto rebels set out parallel plan Bs. For them, the battle to fight permanent fight supremacy was in two fronts: change the charter in the future, now that we cannot change it, or get out. So the main clash in Committee 3 won over SC structure and voting, fueled weaker states to parallel contingency work on making amendments easy. The charter, that's Article 108, and have a complete constitutional review. That's future Article 109. And worst case scenario, a withdrawal clause to be added to the charter. P5 justified their permanence and veto power by their wartime sacrifices they mentioned, and a promised UN standing force under the Military Staff Committee to keep the peace forever. Anti-veto coalition, led de facto by Australian Evet, Dr. Evet, grew to approximately 30 states out of the 50, so they were clear majority. But geopolitical shocks in Europe, especially, for example, the Balkans and Yugoslavia, and what was happening already, starting to happen in Eastern Europe, soft and hard pressure tactics that we mentioned last time, and the P5 under US leadership were resisting a democratic UN or any changes to the Security Council as it was being proposed. In one front, the anti-veto camp tried to clarify the ambiguities on the SC's powers and competencies. In Subcommittee 3-1-B, the anti-veto majority drafted 23 precise questions probing the veto when the veto would be applicable. For example, in cases of Just pure investigations, would that apply? Recommendations, would it apply? ICJ referrals, threat determinations, what's a real security threat? And what's like the abstention effect if one P5 abstains from voting? Who selects the security general and procedural versus substantive decisions? So these were put in 23 questions, and they were very important. The permanent five could not agree on what kind of response to give. And it took them 3 weeks. P4's Big Three plus China on 7th of June gave a joint declaration, dodging the specifics, answering only that P5 could veto even the procedural versus substantive decisions. And we get to that, what's the difference? With clarity denied, 3 weeks lost, where the P5 could not agree amongst themselves, and pressure rising, as we saw in the last session, Connolly forced a binary choice: accept the veto or go home, paving the way for Article 27's SC voting adoption, despite unresolved interpretations of those questions and what may come. Another parallel move for states to save themselves of the possible tyranny of the P5 was just to get out of the UN if the Security Council proves to be dysfunctional. As reform of the Security Council as it bears seemed unattainable, some states saw the withdrawal clause via Committee 1-2. Opinion shifted toward allowing exit if charter change proved impossible. Yet fears of repeating the League of Nations unraveling prevailed. Netherlands was one of the countries pushing for a withdrawal clause, and even Russia wanted it, citing as Soviet Union's constitution had it. But the US was pushing that withdrawal not needed and cited the US constitution that doesn't have it. That exit strategy didn't get anywhere. No clause was added to the charter, no withdrawal provision in the charter text exists, only a commentary acknowledging limited withdrawal possibilities are in the legislative documentation of 1945. Example are possibility upon non-ratification of amendments by member states, but nothing in the charter. There is some just side notes on what withdrawal could mean. Another contingency tried was to remove P5 veto from amendment ratifications to enable veto-proof future reforms by the majority. P5 refused. Belgium's tweak raised ratification from simple to 2/3 majority, making changes harder. Belgium actually wasn't aware that by doing so, it was making top-to-down dictation of changes more difficult, but at the same time, bottom-up changes also to become more difficult. Despite assurance, notably from China, that the veto might fade, Article 108 and 109, especially paragraph 2, entrench P5 concurrence, in other words, veto, for any allegations, locking the veto into amendment procedures. Third and preferred contingency at this time, and these things were kind of happening parallel in parallel, some of them in different committees, but it was part of the same strategies of the anti-veto camp. Their third preference contingency was time-bound charter review once wartime exigencies eased, that it would not consider one specific change, but a general constitutional review of what works and doesn't work and how to fix it to make it work. After the wartime situation is over and we're, are stabilized in peacetime. US personalities, Stassen, Connolly, Dawes, at the conference started to like the idea and framed revisions as normal constitutional evolutionary process. process, citing the U.S. constitutional experience of dozens of amendments. I think up to now, the U.S. has had 27 amendments as needed changes over the years. UK and China were receptive. USSR was not too happy. Taking the green light, Brazil, Canada pushed for a review within 5 to 10 years. Though that specific joint text failed on two-third threshold, momentum produced a P4 compromise fixing a 10-year target rather than 5 years for a special review. Russia still did not want any review, but was playing along. The breakthrough compromise came as Article 109, Paragraph 3, guaranteeing that if no review occurs earlier, the 10th GA session must place it on the agenda. Then a simple GA majority and 7 C votes, no veto, would suffice to convene it. The full Article 109, Paragraph 3 was adopted. In Paragraph 1, the full article, the Paragraph 1, regular reviews can occur by decision of two-thirds of GA plus Security Council majority, which has never happened, never adopted. In Paragraph 2, amendments from reviews still need two-thirds of members, including all P5, their concurrence. In Paragraph 3 was the Founding Fathers' gift, a special one-time 10-year review with lower convening threshold, just the majority, not the two-thirds. The spirit of the deal was for weaker states to accept a temporary veto in exchange for a democratic UN, a scheduled opportunity to reconsider it. P5 publicly expressed goodwill. US, UK, China, France, they were all supportive. USSR was reserved but abstained from blocking the adoption of the San Francisco Promise. Delegates in high spirit of the Great Compromise even voted by show of hand the venue 10 years hence, symbolizing confidence that review would take place. With the raise of hand, Turkey proposed, we propose San Francisco to be the charter review venue for the conference. And by hand, show of hand, everybody agreed. So even the place was set where we are going to have the charter review. In Chapter 6, we examine the first few years, moving to Chapter 6, a few years after UN goes to work. In the first session, so 109.3 was adopted. Nothing else really was of the hope of any future changes coming. In the first session being held in London, because New York City building wasn't ready, donated by Rockefeller. So for the first couple of years, the sessions were in London. Right at outset, USSR used its veto for foreign troop withdrawal from Syria and Lebanon. Actually, their veto was that they were objecting that the resolution is too weak. We've recently seen that in a couple of other cases on Gaza. But it nevertheless proved that the Security Council is paralyzed. The veto was unleashed more frequently and most conspicuously by the USSR, even on issues many considered procedural, producing stalemates on new memberships. Remember, we had the enemy states, we had all these emerging countries from colonial powers. So even agendas, credentials of people and countries, and routine administration was being vetoed by USSR. Frustrations led the General Assembly to adopt Resolution 40 in 1946, urging the Council to reduce difficulties in applying Article 27. By the second session, 1947, abolition entered the agenda. Argentina formally sought a charter review conference, and under Article 109, Paragraph 1, though, abolishing the veto. That was very brave. Philippines had done something similar. The USSR, Gromyko, countered that unanimity was existential. The US advanced a procedural path. A GA resolution tasked the interim committee to study Security Council voting and report back. This was under the legal committee. Committee 6. Positions galvanized into what I call 3 blocks. Abolitionists, which was Argentina, New Zealand, Australia, Chile, Turkey, Egypt, amongst others, and Philippines amongst them, and a couple of other ones. The reformists were US, UK, and their allies. They wanted reforms. They wanted the Security Council veto power to be changed, but not to be completely eliminated. And they were seeking targeted constraints while preserving enforcement vetoes. And then the third group were the USSR, Ukraine, and Eastern Bloc, and conspicuously, actually, France, defending no change. They didn't want any change to the charter. The interim committee produced a 98 multiple-page catalog of possible council decisions, and by majority favored implementing change via a general charter conference under Article 1. And the P5 reformists wanted to wait. They wanted to wait. They thought it was too early until the promised paragraph 3 charter review comes to force. At the GA's third session, Argentina calls for an Article 109 conference. It failed, 12 in favor, 22 opposed, and abstains. Australia's bid to confine the veto to Chapter 7 enforcement in an amendment was also rejected. Instead, the Assembly adopted Resolution 267, a detailed list of procedural matters insulated from the veto, a tactical, in my opinion, breakthrough that enabled day-to-day council work while deferring structural reform. In other words, if something is procedural or substantive, if it's substantive, it can be vetoed. If it's procedural, it cannot. Those kind of housekeeping things were kind of sorted out without any charter change through some agreements. Realistically, blocked under Article 109, paragraph 1, abolitionists recalibrated to wait to the 10th GA session and to trigger the simpler San Francisco promise of Article 109, paragraph 3. Moving on to Chapter 7, the chapter surveys events leading to GA Resolution 992X, my I don't know, ideal resolution in 1955. That was the creation and work of the Arrangements Committee in 1955 to 1967, and post-1967 dormancy to now. It asked whether Article 93 was fulfilled or remains operative, and frames 2 blocks: reformists, many small states, US, UK, China, at times, versus conservatives, the Soviet bloc, and often France, to assess legal status and good faith performance of the promise. That's the objectives of the chapter. The elusive upcoming charter review and the UN's constitutional questions. In 1955, debate broadened beyond veto to representation, competencies, ratifications, human rights, nuclear disarmament, and constitutionalization. These were kind of topics not really referred to in 1945. And remember, 1955 was also the 10-year anniversary of the San Francisco Conference. So the charter reformists pressed to prepare a 1955 review. Conservatives, Soviet bloc, and some Nordic countries, there is some reasons behind it, resisted. The US publicly supported review conference thanks to strong domestic world government currents, concurrent resolutions in the US Senate and the House calling for UN charter reform and a stronger UN. This is Professor Barata's specialty, and that's where I got the reference information. He can explain maybe in question and answer, but very important. The mood in the US was a strong UN, a kind of a world federation light, and a UN that works, and world peace. In the meantime, France, the newly co-opted P5, liked its granted world power privilege and in effect had joined the Soviet Union bloc in discreetly opposing any charter changes. 10 years on, the UN constitutional debate coast to coast, started in New York, ended in San Francisco, but it was just, ceremonial. It was important at the 10th GA, 1955, and the San Francisco 10-year commemoration, which also happened to be again in 1955, where the charter review was supposed to happen. A 2/3 reformist majority floated packages democratizing the Security Council, veto curbs or its abolition, expansion of UNSC, more members, universal membership. In other words, all member states, including enemy states, can now become members. And the reform proposal also promoted human rights institutions, specifically now. ECOSOC's redesign, clarifying regional arrangements, and also judicial reforms and strengthening of the ICJ and its enforcement and its independence. The nuclear disarmament under UN's authority was seriously considered. And for the first time also, environmental issues started coming into agendas. Conservatives argued the review was unnecessary, risking Cold War conditions and duplicative of Article 109. 108. Remember, with 108, you can do amendments, but one at a time. In 109, you can review the whole thing and propose like a constitutional reform. Some reformists simultaneously tabled Article 108 expansions, SC and ECOSOCs. So this was, it happened, it's kind of an offshoot in parallel. In short, the San Francisco Anniversary Conference had most of the touch and the feel of what a charter review would bring. And all went home that their visions will carry at the promised review conference. Remember, the commemoration was in June, but the main GA events are in September. So they were by 2/3 that already adopted all these good things about the charter and how to review it and revise it. And they were hoping it's going to happen September 1955. The charter reformists' quest and founders' promise to seize the moment. Reformists invoked the bargain of Article 109.3, a time-linked simple majority path to a general review. A 6-power draft resolution supported by the US called for a review but it said at an auspicious time, and for establishing a committee to propose time/place by the 12th session, promoting legal, in other words, 2 years from now. Instead of having the review, US said, let's have it, but let's have it 2 years from now. That prompted legal objections by countries like Pakistan, Norway, Yugoslavia at the time, that paragraph 3 obligated fixing time and place at the 10th session itself, that it should not be postponed to 2 years later. But the P5 argued that yes, but the time was not auspicious. GA, General Assembly, adopted Resolution 992X, 21 November 1955, decided a review conference shall be held and at appropriate time. It created a universal arrangements committee, meaning every member state can participate, to recommend time and the place and the agenda. To reinforce detailed research and documentation work was also part of the resolution. In fact, a lot of my work is from those documentations that in 1955 were authorized and budgeted. And they transmitted the decision to the SC. The SC Security Council concurred via Resolution 110 of the Security Council. Here, the results are interesting. There were 9 yeses. Remember, there were 11 at the time, members in the Security Council. There were 9 yeses, 1 no from USSR, but veto didn't apply, 1 abstention, and that was from France. Legally, Article 109.3's GA plus Security Council thresholds were satisfied. That is, both adopted the resolution and only the date and the venue remained to be fixed. From 1957 to 67, the Arrangements Committee repeatedly extended its mandate, and it was extended by GA resolutions. In 1957, 2 years after 55, being the first extension, and resolution 1993 in 1967 being the last one on the subject, with many interim resolutions in between. And there was work being done, like under Ghana's leadership in one of those years, they again came up with really fantastic ideas of how to change the charter, but it wasn't official. All postponing the actual review conference, but still keeping it, and quote unquote, in being. The word in being is part of the resolutions. In fact, waiting for a green light from at least the Western P5. In 1963, subcommittee canvassed especially the P5, by then US, UK enthusiasm had cooled. And all P5 effectively favored the status quo. The committee stayed alive but indecisive. By 1967, it proposed remaining in being without, this time, reporting a deadline. So it remained, the arrangements committee remained, but no date was set. Now, something interesting side event that happened was the need arises to amend the amender, in other words, Article 109. But which paragraph? Security Council and ECOSOC expansions that I'm sure you're aware of, but happened between 1963 and 65, very interestingly had neglected updating Article 109. That how, if that is because now there was more members in the Security Council, how the voting would be done if Article 109 charter review comes up. When GA questioned the Secretary General, it was Utant at the time, he proposed changing the Security Council passing votes from 7 to 9, which makes sense because of the number increase. And then he said initially, let's delete 109.3 because it's obsolete. That brought up a big discussion, and after GA debates, a state preserved 109.3 and amended only the paragraph 1 for the voting numbers to be changed. The majority view under its Australian chairman prevailed that, listen, 109.3 remained operative because the conference had not yet occurred, even though it was now 1967. And deleting it gives the impression that it was held, which it's not. So let's keep it. And that's why you still see 109.3 in the charter. Now, scholarship on Article 109.3. This is the I think, kind of showstopper for a lot of countries and a lot of international law lawyers when they look at 109 paragraph 3. Is the paragraph obsolete, as Utant said? A sort of a Bible in the UN reference library is the UN Charter. It's called Commentary, published every 10 years by a group of German scholars. They are not part of the UN or the legal committee, but their book is used a lot as a source, and I've used it too. The commentary edited by Bruno Suma in Germany, in the section on 109.3, so in each chapter, each article, they have a section on 109.3, labels 109.3 obsolete, but he has misread the 1965 records. That's what Utant said. But then General Assembly said, you're wrong. You cannot say it's obsolete because it hasn't been held yet. The Sixth Committee rejected deletion precisely to signal the paragraph's continuing effect and partial, not full, implementation. Legally absent of a held review or a repealing General Assembly Act 109.3 persists, unexecuted in full and arguably breached both legally and in spirit. Setting the date and place, the last rendezvous. GA Resolution 2114 in 1965, previous to the last, again kept the committee in being. Resolution 2285, 1967, did so indefinitely and clarified reactivation mechanism that in fact any member state may ask Secretary General to reconvene the arrangements committee. I'm going to tell you later in the next sessions that why that's dangerous to do it only by one country. Secretary General consults and convenes if desirable, based on their request. The committee then fell dormant. Yet UN yearbooks, which were very valuable to me, I was looking at every single year, for 25 years, up to 1995, 25 years later, almost 50 years after 1955, that the arrangements committee existed, but did not meet that year. So it was in the official roster. Thus, institutionally, the review machinery survives, idle but not dead. Chapter 4 through 7, in conclusion, show a through line San Francisco quid pro quo, temporary acceptance of the veto subject to a review. Met General Assembly and Security Council adoption criteria in 1955, but stalled on fixing the time and place amid P5 conservatism and Cold War politics. Article 1093 was activated but never fulfilled. The Arrangements Committee remains legally in being. In other words, the review conference, the constitutional review, is in coma. It's not dead, it can be made alive. So this was a summary of those 3 chapters, and I'm ready for exciting Q&A session.
So, are there questions for Sharia? Well, I have one that I can start things off with, and that is that I was impressed that the perspective of Russia and others who didn't agree to have the review were included in a very, I think, fair-minded way. But the objection of Russia, if I recall, was that if there wasn't, okay, Russia talked about unity, that the agreement was the Security Council would be unified, and that if you do away with the veto, then the unity would be dismissed. So, framing things in a different way, and also saying that if they don't have the veto, then Russia was afraid that it would be always outvoted, and it could never have its way. And I'm thinking this raises a question about democracy in terms of one person, one vote, or one country, one vote. I took a course in conflict about Ireland, in Northern Ireland, that conflict. And as I understand, the problem was that one side, they were so divided that the people on each side would always vote for theirs. There was no crossover ever on issues. And so it made it so that one side felt they could never be represented. I'm wondering what comments you might have about, is this a problem for democracy? Maybe the concept of democracy needs to be, a little more thought about more deeply than just one person or one state per vote.
Okay, well, I think this is a very hot topic. You're absolutely right. No easy answer. But my experience in studying regional organizations and, some sort of federalist countries is that there is a solution, and that's qualitative and quantitative voting. In other words, for example, we have this same issue in European Union. You have a small country like Luxembourg, less than 1 million, and then you have Germany, over 80, 90 million people. And then how are you going to make decisions where some of the rights of Luxembourg are being held? Now, in the US, what do? We say, okay, we got the Senate and the Congress. but theirs is more complicated. I wouldn't say complicated, but more fair. In other words, first of all, it depends on the decision, and then the decision could be two-thirds of the population versus two-thirds of the states, for adoption of a resolution. So like in case of Soviet Union, they were right. They were, especially in 1945, they were the only communist country. All the other member states who were participating, except like Ukraine and Belarus, they were mostly Western supported and Western anti, capitalist. So to them, it was existential to have the veto. 1955, it had changed a bit. You had some revolutionary governments and, pro-Russia, newly independent countries, but still they were the minority. But that, brings up to your question on democracy in general. And I think the qualitative and quantitative majority would take care of that issue. Like there was an amendment way in 1945. In fact, Iran made that amendment, which didn't get anywhere, that let's make the Security Council's decisions two-thirds. Instead of concurrence of the permanent five, let's make it the concurrence of two-thirds of the member states. So that may have, solved a lot of the existing war and peace issues that Security Council faces. But very tough. There is no easy answer. I gladly, welcome other people's comments on that. That's very important.
Yes, I think the issue really is not just one entity, one vote, but fair representation. So, certain structures might prevent fair representation. Oh, Vernita, you're muted. You're muted.
Okay.
There we go.
Hello again, everybody. Sharyar, from the first time I read your dissertation years ago, I just said the amount of work that went into you getting this history down on paper over a timeline. I mean, it is precious. It is invaluable. It's been invaluable to my work. And I just want to say thank you. And then also just being reminded of the positions of the different countries, and right now, including the position of the United States at various times in history. My question is, what words of wisdom or what advice would you give based, say, I'll just use the United States, based on what the United States did in those earliest days in 1945 and then in 1955, and what would your words of wisdom be, just given that history, United States side, and then fast forward to this past week, Mamdani and others, if you could perhaps contextualize both of those, and if you had any thoughts, words of wisdom, and they certainly respond to the question on democracy there.
Right. Well, again, first of all, I thank you folks, World Federalists, for my research. And my research was very focused. I wasn't doing a historical research. I was looking at legislative history pertaining to possibility of change. So it was very focused, and a lot of, there are a lot more deep research studies done by others. But in terms of the US position, I think at the beginning, Roosevelt had a World Federalist light kind of idea for the UN. Then he evolved by 1945 to be more like regional. And in fact, that's why he, insisted China to be as part of it. And, trying to have a regional kind of resolution overlapped in a UN type of architecture. But the US was genuinely wanted the UN to work. And they really believed in the UN. Again, Joseph Barata's, book helps in understanding, like Kennedy and some other prominent U.S. politicians wanted UN reform. This was true up to 1955, but then it faded away. And the next chapter, in the last two chapters, we will know why U.S. changed its position to a frozen charter, just like Russia. But in terms of other points that you made, like Mamdani and what future brings, I think other colleagues can contribute more, or yourself. Maybe you want to say something on that.
My sense, and I'd written a short piece on some of the folks in the quote unquote progressive lane in the United States, I think would be much more open to the ideas concerning charter review. That's all, but I have not been in dialogue directly with them, indirectly kind of, but I'm experienced a bit of openness that I hadn't experienced before, but no more than, but thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Francisco, you're mute.
Now, I got it.
There we go.
I'd like to ask dear Sharei, if you agree with the Mexican Center proposal that once we have already installed the General Conference to review the charter, our proposal in Mexico is not to make any proposal to reform the charter, because we think it is a waste of time. Our Mexican proposal since 20 years ago is not to make a proposal to reform, but to transform the entity, organization of the United Nations into a world parliament. That is our proposal since many years ago. What do you think, my dear Dr. Sharei?
Well, as I said, Francisco has been always on this topic and introduced me to 109 paragraph 3. And thanks for the reality check. Again, we're going to talk about in the last two chapters. I think any kind of reform is going to be, it won't get anywhere. In other words, it's going to be the kind of situation where you cannot solve anything unless you solve everything, which means transformation, not the existing tweaking here and there, the charter. Like, what do you do with the climate change? How do you handle climate change, which wasn't even thought about at that time? How about artificial intelligence and governing artificial intelligence? How about space mining, space militarization? So you're absolutely right. I think reform is not going to work. It needs to be transformation. And the transformation to me is when the people get rights and the people would be presented in a parliament and there would be legislation. In other words, constitutionalization. I think transformation you're talking about and constitutionalization I think about is more or less that's where they would converge.
Thank you
Thanks for
so
pointing
much.
it out.
Thank you.
Joseph, you're on mute, I think.
Thank
There we
you.
go.
Sharei, I would like to ask two little very short questions and matter-of-fact questions, and then a larger question about politics and legislation. First of all, in your dissertation, you are listed as Mahmoud Sharei, and yet you seem to prefer another first name, Sharyar. Which is it? Which do you prefer?
Okay. Well, actually, good question. The Mahmoud Sharei was always my name at school, birth certificate. But my parents, which is an Arabic Muslim name. And then my parents called me Shahryar, which is actually a Persian name. And I thought it means, like the royal or the king. But at Gandhi's, we were at a conference of high justices in India, and at Gandhi's tomb, the chief justice of one of the states in India, um, he actually knew some Farsi and Persian. He said, "Do you know what your name means?" And I said, yeah, like King Shahryar means like the king or the king of the kings. He said, no, it's Shahr Yar. And Shahr means city and Yar means a friend of, which is right, if you break the words. So I liked my nickname and I added it to moved my first name to middle. Still Mahmoud is there, but Shahryar is friend of the city.
So what would you like us in the public to say?
I think, to be honest with you, I think the easiest would be Shari, because for you guys, your friends, you can call me anything you want. But I think for the public, Shari would be easier than Shahriyar, 2 syllables.
Well, let me ask you a second question then. This is, you use Latin expressions, and I must say my Latin is getting awfully rusty. But in earlier chapters, you used to ask the question, are these proposals infra virus or ultra virus? Well, infra virus would mean within or in beneath our powers. But ultra virus means in excess of our powers and beyond our powers. And I think you were saying that what is happening now in, say, years in the 21st century is that the Security Council is operating ultra virus beyond its powers. It's assumed powers. And I think let me know if that's correct, because it's a big distinction. If the Security Council is usurping powers, that draws the challenge that it's illegitimate. Now, I find myself in understanding this book of yours, which I agree with Miss Fort, is a very, very informative, close reading of the operations in the United Nations, and it's helpful. But to go back to your first chapter, I've been very interested all through this by this thesis. On page Roman numeral 2, by the way, the Security Council since 2000 has deployed its auto-interpreted expanded powers in the diverse areas of court-making, law-making, defining criminality, and sanctioning non-state actors as criminals. So as I follow you, especially as in this latter part of the book, in the coming two last chapters, 8 and 9, you're arguing that the Security Council has begun to act like a world legislature. And sometimes you actually say that it's functioning like a world government. That is, it is legislating binding rules upon individuals. And these are mostly criminals in the transnational terrorist network that it wishes to suppress, but the Security Council defines them as terrorists and lawbreakers to start with, even though there really isn't a statute of the United Nations that could be cited as the standard of their violations. The point is, as you argue, I think, with troubling power, is that What we used to imagine in a world government was something like the formation of the United States, when the people, the patriots, the majority of Americans back in the 18th century decided that they would create a government to protect them. The very thesis of John Locke. Well, what you're saying is this has never worked, and the states are resistant to the kinds of reforms, including abolition of the veto, because it would elevate the people of the world as sovereigns. And the present system protects the states as sovereigns. And what you're describing in this book is a kind of sovereign usurpation of power that belongs to the sovereign people. But it's effective. This is what's so troubling to me. The Security Council wages wars, and it dispatches forces to apprehend terrorists, and it lays waste to whole cities, as in Iraq. Could it? I mean, I think that what is happening is not that a great democratic upsurge of the people is taking place and is offering to the sovereign states a better organized union government. No, not at all. What's happening is that, starting with the Americans, the sovereign states are usurping powers that belong to a popular government. And we're going to see a kind of imperial order imposed upon mankind as this continues. Frankly, the reform of the Charter in accordance with Article 109, I find a long shot, and I just don't think we cannot compel the United States and the other P5. It would break what Gale was calling the great power unanimity. The great power unanimity is actually the principle by which the United Nations works at all, even when states usurp powers that belong to the people. And so we're having what's happening is a kind of imperial usurpation of power until we finally have some kind of rules that are actually obeyed. And the whole democratic process has been superseded. I think that's what you argue in the whole book, especially by the last chapter.
Okay, you mentioned quite a few different things, and I need to clarify. First, regarding the use of the word intravirus and ultravirus, this is what's common in international law, if it is within the competency or not. The hegemonic between the period of, after the Berlin Wall breakdown until recently, let's say Ukraine war or, pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, the permanent five were kind of acting in unison. And that's when they were being hegemonic. So when they veto, the Security Council becomes dysfunctional. When they are in agreement, it's also might be dangerous because they are acting in hegemony. That's when they started legislating. That's when they started to make courts. For example, just right now, the Syrian president, there was a resolution sponsored by US. I don't know how many of you read in the news, that the Syrian president was taken off of the Al-Qaeda list of the UN. So at one point they put him in, all the permanent five agreed, but then, US says, no, no, that guy is no longer a terrorist, is president of Syria. So, take him out of the list. And every country except China voted yes, China abstained. So the point is that they could make people criminal, they can make legislation, which is like a world government, but are they legitimate? Who are they? There are only 15 countries and only 5 of them are making the decisions. So we had a period of about 20 years that they were acting hegemonic. And, like the Patriot Act got implemented globally, in terms of, in name of, terrorism and money laundering. But then when they are not in unison, then they are paralyzed. Like, for example, climate change. But Security Council can do something about it. But, when it came to the vote that call it a global threat, China and Russia voted no. So it didn't get anywhere. This was sponsored by the European Union countries. Now, regarding the auto interpretation, that's the problem. This is the liberals, scholars, and international lawyers call these activities of the Security Council ultra-virus. That is not in its competency. Why it's doing it? In my opinion, even though I side with the liberals, but it is within its competencies because the Security Council is worded so vaguely. The word peace and security can mean so many things. The fact that they can, under Chapter 7, call even, military, it just gives them not only a lot of power, but auto-interpretation. There is no checks and balances. There is no constitutional court that can check them. There is no legislative power that, can check them. There is no elections as such for the permanent 5. The permanent 5 are permanently the 5 that we know. So the legitimacy is the issue with the Security Council. And I don't think anywhere I've spoken of the fact that people have rights at the UN Charter or in the UN Charter unless we have the review and it gets constitutionalized. Now, in the next 2 chapters, we're going to talk about that possibility. You're right. It probably would never get anywhere, but it might if there is a constitutional moment. But that we leave for next sessions.
Other questions? Okay, I have another one then, and that is those who have wanted a review. I think the U.S. I mean, you mentioned the change of the U.S. position on this. There seems to be some worry that if there is a constitutional review, the result will be worse than what we have now. And I'm wondering, what is with the fear? What do people fear might happen that we don't think is desirable?
Right. Actually, nobody has thought about charter review since, I would say, 1967, when the last resolution kept the arrangement committee in being, but then didn't set any date. So to be honest, only until recently, maybe after this book's publication, and now there is a coalition, supposedly coalition on Article 109. Only recently there has been interest in charter review, and a couple of diplomats and heads of states have also mentioned it in the last couple of September sessions of the General Assembly. So nobody has really thought about it much because it's such a grand thing, such a big thing. But in terms of, and we're going to talk about it more again in the next 2 sessions. But to answer your question regarding that we will end up with something worse, this actually was brought up to me with our own World Federalist colleagues. I first introduced this in Argentina in one of our congresses in Argentina about 10, 15 years ago. And I didn't get a majority to have a charter review based on San Francisco Promise. And the argument by Bill Pace and some others was that we are going to end up, the charter is going to be ripped. We're going to end up with the worst charter. Now, why that wouldn't happen? First of all, technically, legally, the permanent five, we still need their ratification. So if one of them doesn't ratify, the charter remains frozen. So that's one thing. There is a, sort of a plan B that wouldn't happen. Secondly, let's say it does happen. Let's say, before I get there, he was also mentioning that, we have International Criminal Court. It would be blown up. You've got all these human rights conventions. Then they would nowhere, they wouldn't be there anymore. But the fact is that ICC is not part of the UN. The fact is that all these human rights conventions, first of all, don't have any enforcement, don't have any court, and they are all separate treaties. They are not part of the UN Charter. So technically they remain intact. So there are worries that what we lose is not really true. Because first of all, the charter can still remain frozen. Secondly, all of these good things that we value, like the International Criminal Court, are outside of the UN. Then fast forward 10 years, guess what happened? Israel, tears the charter, in fact, he uses a shredder in the front of General Assembly. So the charter is already torn. Muammar Gaddafi did that, 15 years ago. He called the permanent five the true Al-Qaeda of the world. So the charter is already torn. Who cares about the UN in terms of peace and security anymore? The Secretary General doesn't get even a visa to go visit Gaza. So it's already happened. What Bill Pace was afraid of, and look at the International Criminal Court. What he was afraid of happened without the charter review. So we don't have anything more to lose by having a charter review.
Donna.
I have a comment.
Go ahead, Winston. Go ahead, Winston.
This is a rich discussion. I want again to thank the author for the immense work that went into the production of the book he has given us. And I think it will have an increasing effect globally as people come to know it more. The idea, just a comment and one general question. The idea that a charter review would end up destroying everything, I think, is an exaggeration. That sounds very much like, the conservative Burke when he faced the French Revolution. Everything was going to be destroyed. Except it's coming from a particular perspective, as it were. The role of the French Revolution, the world at large, certainly Europe in particular, cannot be questioned at all. The second comment having to do with Joseph's position, and I fully agree with him about those usurpations. But the idea of the sovereignty of the people of the world is very much involved in the idea of our being in the human rights movement itself, namely that the community of human beings happens to be prior to and is also superior to the nation-state system itself. Once people become fully aware of that in a popular movement, I don't think the state machinery and the military will have very much to say about it. The rich and the powerful in the world are going to be leaning toward the status quo. We have to accept that.
They are, in fact, influencing the direction in which the UN goes. Look how the Economic and Social Council was formed, how the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, the voting system within them, they disclose a particular temper and attitude toward power and political leadership. So, my question to you has to do with the clamors about obsolescence of Section 3. That makes me very, very nervous, because I could see that becoming increasingly an argument by the P5 or some members of the P5 to avoid the General Conference for the review of the Charter. Only, as a number of people have said, a general review will allow for anything but an ad hoc focus on what I would call the amendment process as distinct from the review process. So would you say a little more about this obsolescence matter and what is the basis for Uthant's claiming that it was obsolete?
Okay, well, thanks for your comments and thanks for having confidence that not to be scared of charter review. In fact, that's the only thing we have to make UN relevant again. It's already irrelevant. Yeah, regarding the obsolescence, it definitely legally it's not obsolete. It exists, and the Australian and the General Assembly decision to keep it, whereas Utah said get rid of it, is another strengthening point that it still is in force. But if it becomes serious, and between us here, and maybe we don't want to have it in recording, if this becomes serious, the San Francisco Promise, exactly what Winston, you're saying, the permanent five are going to put their, or some of them, I think most of them, are going to put their finger on. Hey, this is obsolete. Forget it. You have to have a charter review. If you want to have it under, paragraph 1, which requires a whole process to be repeated again. And this is, in fact, the threat. Remember, there was a P5 and then there was a small 5. Switzerland became a UN member state only recently, I think in 1992 or 1995. So they were, gung-ho that we were going to reform the UN. We want a UN that works. So they created the small 5, S5, which was themselves, Jordan, I think one Latin American country, 2 other small countries. So they gathered a big momentum in General Assembly, about 100 states, in terms of how to reform the Security Council. Then they got cornered in the lobby of General Assembly by all permanent 5 that, listen, stop this nonsense. If you continue, we're going to drag it into 2/3 majority, like the paragraph 1 type of adoption, which 2/3 these days is almost, especially with the island states and especially with the proxy states of the permanent 5, is, I think, impossible to get. So, yeah, they are going to be pushing on that obsolescence in terms of their trying to avoid a review conference.
Donna.
Yes, I want to thank Shahryar also for his wonderful book, and these discussions have been really interesting. Thank you. I wanted to comment on to just let Shahryar and others who maybe don't know, Citizens for Global Solutions, we are the largest U.S. member of the World Federalist Movement Institute for Global Policy. And we our theory of change does assume that we need charter review in order to change the UN. Just wanted to, we don't, and our thought about how that, part of how that happens is by trying to win over, the hearts and minds of people around the world, that we're all citizens of the world, to try to develop that sense that makes people uncomfortable with the nations being the sovereign thing rather than the people. And that trying to encourage people to recognize that having the nations be the sovereign entities in our world has led us to war and famine and destruction and nuclear weapons and climate disaster. And anyway, so I know it does seem hopeless maybe, but we feel that you need to keep trying, because otherwise we're doomed to whatever, destruction. So anyway, that I just wanted to share that. Just a comment. I don't know.
Thanks a lot to both Citizens for Global Solutions and WFM changing their conservative sort of, they were very progressive in the first 2-3 decades, but then they became kind of conservative. They didn't even want to use the World Federalist, and they did, change the names. But you guys are back in track, and very supportive, very practical in your approach. And thanks to the leadership, yourself and the other folks. But I think there is hope. We'll discuss it in the next 2 sessions. There is a good chance, especially now, because all these value things like international law, United Nations, World Court, these are all have become discredited. So having the appropriate structure and world government rather than governance, or a UN which is a world government light, is not, the need for it is felt. So the timing is right for some unfortunate reasons, but the timing is right, and we just have to seize the moment.
Well, that sounds like a good ending of this session. We have a few minutes for if anyone has any announcements or anything. I have an announcement about the next 2 sessions. Our meeting in December will be Saturday, December 13. It's the second Saturday of December as usual. Also at this same, day and time, Saturday at noon Eastern time, we'll be discussing chapter 8. That's pages 340 to 353. And then in January, we'll have a concluding session, session 5, January 10, again, the second Saturday of the month, January, chapters 9 and conclusion, pages 354 to 418. And you'll get, a message reminding you about those. So are there other announcements?
I just had a question for Joseph. I sent you a message, Joseph, and hoping we could connect after the session today. Thank you.
And Gail, I just want to clarify that we had spoken, since chapter 9 is the normative part, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions and a lot of comments, constructive comments, I'm sure. So it needs more than 1 session, but chapter 8 is mostly legal, and I can do like chapter 8 and part of chapter 9 next time, and dedicate the whole last session to chapter 9 and questions and answers, policy recommendations, that kind of thing, more practical stuff.
Okay, so we'll revise the schedule. On December 13, we will address chapter 8 and also
part of
chapter 9.
Yeah.
So we can go ahead and read chapter 9. Our discussion at that might not completely address, the whole of chapter 9, but
Right.
I want to read chapter 9 for that. And then the concluding session will focus on conclusions.
All right.
I have
Any
a
workshop
question.
regarding chapter 9.
I was looking for the book to purchase online, and it's outside of my budget. So is there an alternative to getting hold of the manuscript or the book online in a different way?
Uh,
And I'm grateful for a free copy from the author, signed also. And I'll give you my address.
Yeah, James sent a message to those. Are you on our e-list?
I might be. I'm new here today, but I will definitely. I'm looking at the website. I'd you go onto the website and sign up there?
Or put your name in the chat, and I'll make sure you get added to
Okay, thank you.
to our book club. We have a special. Lee, you're waving your hand. Lee, did you want to say something?
I've been reading it. I've been reading it as he published it for his PhD, and that is very easy to access. It has been given as a link in all of the and most of the announcements about this group meeting, and it just says here you can read it here, and HERE is a place on these announcements where you can get his thesis and read it just as well as in the book, and it costs nothing.
Yeah, so James will send you, if you're on the e-list, you'll get announcements from James, and that will include that information.
And I'll add you to the list using your, is that your email there?
Yes.
Okay.
No space.
I,
That's a mistake.
Let
No,
me
yeah.
just make also a couple of comments regarding the book. Shirley is right. You can go to the University of Kent repository, and the thesis is there, but it's not identical. In fact, it was mentioned in the email word by word. It's not. It's 90% the same. But the book has updated references. I don't know if this is, yeah, it has updated references. And it really is intended, just like the commentary, the UN commentary I mentioned, the German publication that comes every 10 years. That one is 2 volumes and $500. Mostly universities get it. This one is also intended mostly to be used as a reference. I mean, us World Federalists probably like it or love it page to page, from the beginning to the end. But actually for an international lawyer, for a UN employee, for, a scholar, they want to use it as reference, what resolution was used when,
Right.
what was the text of the resolution. So that's why it's kind of expensive, because it's really like a reference book. But then also I recommended the ebook version is a lot more easier to access, and also to access the references. One of the values is the 700 references it has, and including Joseph Barata's, of course, is listed there. So, those references are more easily accessible through the ebook. And my recommendation was that if CGS gets an ebook version, maybe it can be loaned to people, because I think Barnes and Noble, I think allows, lending the books. I'm not sure, but yeah. So last choice would be, going to the website, of the University of Kent in the depository there. But also, please, those who have gotten the book, write me a review. I will appreciate it.
So Khalil, you put something in the chat asking also for, about how to get the book. So I hope what we were just discussing answers your
Right.
question, and you'll be able to get access to it. Be sure to sign up, to be a member of the book club, and then you'll get the messages from James, and that'll have that information on it.
Bernita, hands up.
Just quick question for Joseph. Did you see my message, Joseph? Can you send me a quick response?
I don't know that Joseph reads chats. Joseph, do you?
Oh, it's on the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure he does that.
Okay.
Can you? Yeah, I don't know. Joseph, do you mind if I send Michael your email address afterwards? I'll send him an email if that's okay with you. You're on mute, Joseph. We can't hear you.
Please give my email to
Michael. Okay,
Michael.
I'll send you an email, Michael, afterwards.
That's perfect.
Okay.
That'll work just fine. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I think someone, Mr.
Bernita?
Khalil, put yeah, on the chat that how he can register for the link. He's not in our CGS
Yeah.
list.
Put your Khalil, if you put your email in the chat, I will make sure I add you to the list. Or yeah, that's probably the easiest. Or you could go to our website and make a note that you want to be added to book club. But if you just put your email in the chat, I'll add you myself. Got it. Whoa.
Bernita, you have your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to know the extent to which you understand the book will reach university libraries and other libraries, and suggestions that you have for incentivizing any institutions we're associated with to get the book. I'm not sure of the process, but maybe you are better.
Right. Actually, I really haven't worked on the promotion of the book, but in Brussels, we've written, and a couple of the French-speaking universities have already obtained it for their legal, law department bookstore, not bookstore, library. So I think it's a perfect thing, a perfect book, and especially as a reference for university libraries. So I'm going to work on that, and also some key policymakers or advocates. We're going to send them free copies. So hopefully it would get more attention and more coverage in the next few months. It's something that it's not going to be out of date soon. This for 80 years, the discussions have been the same. The legislative history remains the same. And unless we have a new UN 2.0, the book is relevant, I think.
Thank you.
Right.
And Joseph? Oh, he's clapping. Okay, well, this is, we're just out of time, like we have 1 minute left. So we will, oh, Francisco, you have your hand up. You're on mute.
One short comment, last comment, regarding the transformation proposal. I just want to mention that the USA had a transformation at the Philadelphia Convention 1787 from a Confederate regime to a federation. It was a real transformation of an entity. And just want to mention that.
Yeah, bravo. Yeah, that was very, very important in history.
Well, that's a good conclusion to our session.
Oh.
Thank you so much, everybody.
And I put a link in the chat for getting feedback. We welcome feedback from everyone on today's session. It helps us, continue to improve book club. So if you could go check out the link in the chat to give us your feedback. Thank you.
Just real quickly, I just happened to watch an interview by Wole Soyinka, who is the Nobel laureate for literature, the first and only out of Africa. And he was doing a comparative assessment of what was happening in Uganda compared to what is happening in the United States now. And also just thinking of all the constitutional issues. And one reason that I asked the question about the United States, while he is so disturbed by what's happening now, he was resident in the United States for many, many years. And so also acknowledged all the things that were made possible for him and for him to do this scholarship. So when you, Fernando, mentioned Pennsylvania and the like to, yeah, to pull on those things, the history that you, Shari, have certainly laid out for us in terms of your focus on Article 109. So thank you. That's all. I'm done. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, well, that's a wrap. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you on December 13.
Yeah, thank you, beautiful people. Peace on earth.